in order to, get us to do what we have to do. And by the way, the Dutch have invented this greenhouse that is completely self-sufficient. Not in Holland.
So, the two people were mentioned. Catherine, you were first? No.
Yeah, I can certainly have a go. Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think, as Annabelle mentioned, you think of yourself and think, well, what sacrifices am I not making? And I'm sure a lot, and it makes me think, I don't know how much I've flown this year, but it can't be very good in some respects. But I think you're right, there's things about the psychology, and I think this even applies to myself. Again, when you see the people around you aren't doing anything, then, if everyone's responsible, then no one is. But also, I would bring this back up to things like government. If you see the government's not doing any of the stuff it should be doing, then you kind of think, well, why should I bother if they're not trying? And I think that speaks a lot to the individuals who actually have apathy in this situation as well. I think I'll leave it there and pass it on.
Somebody else? Oh, David.
I do agree with that. I think one has to, as I tried to say in the lecture, one has to talk about local solutions and not just global. But I do entirely agree with this point about moral distance, which is added to physical distance and economic distance. And there's one of my favorite quotes, and this is from a colonial officer, so this is from about 1870. It was a guy who was the governor of Madras. And he said, the reason why we have to, as a government, take responsibility for famine relief is because we must always remember we're dealing with that proportion of the population with whom our natural sympathies are the least lively. That is to say, the poor, as well as the fact that in the 19th century you could assume racism. So that, in terms of the ethics of global response, I think there is a dehumanizing process. And what I like about that image that I showed is this is a very atypical picture of famine. All pictures of famine are the same, mothers and babies, or occasionally children with pot bellies and thin legs. This is designed to almost to inure people to the idea that this is actually people. It's quite difficult to, I think, for most of the population of the global north to put themselves in the shoes. And if you could do that, and I think this is where people like Geldof have had some success, but is also guilty. In fact, if you listen to the lyrics of the Band-Aid song in terms of his characterization of what Africa is like. So I think that is a very useful potential direction for travel.
Is that although political philosophers have signally failed to answer the question that she posed because they have tried to deal with it in terms of justice, actually moral philosophers have been rather good at this. And one of the books in which, the excellent books, has just been mentioned by Inez, Jonathan Glover's Causing Death and Saving Lives, published in the 70s. And a book of mine, my first book, called Violence and Responsibility, addresses this question. And last and certainly least, an article by Peter Singer, Famine, Affluence and Morality, also addresses this problem. And what I talk to my students about is that ethics, morality, is there for when sympathy and altruism fail. What moral philosophy, what morality is there for, is to provide principles and rules to explain to people what they need to do when their sympathy fails, either because of moral distance or physical distance, or because nobody's showing them a photograph. And more importantly, governments are there for when individual action fails, because most of these things cannot be done, cannot be discharged. Most of these obligations are so comprehensive that they cannot be discharged at the individual level. They have to be discharged collectively, either by national governments on behalf of their citizens in need, or by collectives of international organizations on behalf of those countries that can't do this for themselves. And I wanted to disagree with another one of my colleagues, Catherine. It's not true that if everyone's responsible, then no one is. Everyone is responsible, but not everyone discharges that responsibility. And that's why we first need moral philosophy to direct us, and secondly, we need government action to make sure that everyone's responsibility is discharged by everyone in a fair way, and only governments can do this through taxation.
Thanks. I go on to the next one there, please. Yep, I'll have you down. My name is Dimitri
Mr. President. Dear Professor, my name is Dimitri Papavasiliou. I'm a lawyer. Thank you for all your very interesting discussion and presentation of today, and especially Mrs. Rhodes about international instruments. I feel obliged to make a note that we should remember all the time that the term discussing about sustainability, that the term of sustainable development, it has been made for the first time reference in the treaties that they have established the European Union. And if I remember well, it was in the relative chapter of external relations and concerning the development, the help for the assistance and the assistance for the developing countries. Since then, a lot of other international instruments, they have been elaborated. My question is as follows. Do you think that since that time that we have in the a very original text establishing the European Union and the treaties, the reference made already, do we have enough progress from the part of the European bodies and organs like European Commission? And in that sense, do you think that it might be space for legal liabilities if we have not enough progress on that issue?
Again, the short answer would be no. There's not been enough progress. But yeah, I have also done a study that looked at the European Union and its failures in sustainability. And it goes through a similar process. They make very good statements on it and don't follow that through in policy. And I did that particular study looking at the biofuels policy. But what I'd also say is that I got concerned as well looking at the European Union. I didn't look back to that treaty, but the more recent documents discussing sustainable development, they very much seem to frame it as this means European economic growth. So it's a very inward-looking concept of sustainable development, which, in fact, I think isn't sustainable. So as for legal liabilities, I can't see that being accepted at the moment, because why do you want to make yourself legally liable for something you're not matching up to? But again, that might be an interesting thing for civil society to kind of model that. Were you held legally liable, you'd have been punished on this, this, and this by now.
Thanks. Anybody else? Okay. Peter.
Say something in support of what David Matthews said with regard to local and distant food. There's very good epidemiological data that having fresh fruit and vegetables available throughout the winter is one of the major factors that's brought down the incidence of coronary heart disease in Europe. And therefore, campaigns to make one eat only food produced within 50 miles would have a terrible cost.
Going back to the sustainability question, actually, I wouldn't disagree with the findings about the failures of the European Commission. I'm not here to verify them or just say that it's a success. But having said that, I think that if you look carefully at the innovation strategy for 2020, that the Commission produced last week, there is a specific chapter focused on social sustainability and social innovation. And I think that's a step forward. And I haven't seen in any political document produced by any international organization thus far a clear, explicit reference to social innovation with set deadlines and specific targets that need to be met. By this, I'm not implying that sustainability should be approached in such narrow term, just increasing economic growth and making sure that certain macro-financial targets are met. However, I think there has been quite gradual recognition on behalf of the European Commission, at least, of the fact that there is a need to address sustainable development from a social perspective. And now they try to come up with, as far as I know, this is not part of the job of my unit at least, to come up with an index and, let's say, a ranking to find out specific social parameters against which they're going to rank to evaluate whether sustainable development in a social perspective has been achieved in certain member states. It's not, I'm not sure if there is a clear methodology or they just borrow something from a university or academia, but I think it's a step forward. And it's a very difficult term to define, and that failure to come up with a uniform or a minimum definition of this term and the difficulties in achieving it in many senses shouldn't be used against the efforts of each and every organization when they try to kind of promote it, even in the narrowest of its senses. However, I think that just looking at the Innovation Union 2020 strategy document is going to shed light on many hidden and gray aspects of the Commission's Sustainable Development Strategy, hopefully.
Thank you. So I have one here in the front and then to you. First this one.
There was a comment about colonialism, and they included the Greeks as colonialists. This is totally wrong. Colonialism, the definition
Alexander
of
the
colonial.
Great, for example?
Okay.
A great synthesizer.
No, I will answer to him. Colonialism is defined when you go and conquer an inhabited area and you exploit the people and the region. The Greeks never went and conquered another place, inhabited, and they never exploited it. The campaign of Alexander the Great was defense. The Persians came twice and invaded Greece in Marathon, in Salamis. And Alexander the Great told Miltiades and Themistocles, the best defense of your country is to attack them. He went there and stopped the third invasion of Greece. If he did not go there and stop the third invasion, you will be Hoxha, and all the ladies today will have burqa.
I don't think
That's
the
the
Egyptians.
It's not bad.
I don't think the Egyptians
That's
were
the
invading Greece, but Alexander also conquered Egypt. This is nonsense.
Well, you know, if you read the Quran, please, the most sacred book of the Islamists, including Egyptians. If you read the Quran, there is a chapter about the Greeks, and there is another chapter about Alexander the Great as savior of the world.
But it means the Byzantines and the Christians when the Prophet
No, you just answer. No. I didn't came in this conference. I didn't came in this conference to talk about these things, but to correct. Well, my question is the most urgent and current problem of Greece is the so-called economic and financial crisis. What do you have to suggest for this very important problem created by the American colossus of Lehman Brothers and Sachs and others? Will you please?
We'll stop there and then we'll come to the panel, please.
If they have any advice to give us. Thank you.
Okay, panel. Who's going to jump into this? John, you want to